The Flash is, in a way, the comic book movie equivalent to watching a train crash. Sure, it may not be something you should watch, and it can be pretty horrifying, but at the same time, you just can't look away from it, and to some degree, you may be able to get some entertainment out of it. I'm going to come right out the gate and say this, I did not entirely enjoy this movie. I did not find it as good as some other people are making it out to be right now, and while I don't think this film is even close to being as bad as some other DC projects, it certainly wasn't what I wanted out of a Flash movie, and a comic book movie in general. But before I drag this movie down with my criticisms, I do want to talk about the positives here, because even though it's a mess, it doesn't mean that it was all bad. While I'm not the biggest fan of this version of Barry Allen, I do think Ezra Miller does a fine job here. They do well in playing up the different versions of Barry with the present-day Flash we know and his past self, and although I'll have more to say about Barry later on, at the very least, acting-wise, he's done well. Michael Keaton returning as his version of Batman was honestly really fun to watch. He pulled a lot of the weight throughout the film, both for the action scenes and regular conversations. And although I don't think he was used as effectively as he could have been, I still had a fun time seeing him on screen. Really, my biggest worry with him was the amount of references the movie would try to throw in our faces, but thank God the filmmakers didn't do that. Until later in the film, but we'll get to that. Supergirl, while not as fleshed out as I wanted her to be, was still good. Sasha Calle does a decent job with her in the script she's given, and does make for a decent adaptation of the character, with the little screen time she's given. Funny enough, the thing I enjoyed the most about the film was the story itself. While not being an exact adaptation of the Flashpoint comic, I do think that the overall translation of that was done well here. Many of the ideas here are pulled off well, and in some cases are really creative, such as how the film works around showing the Flash's origin story. I especially enjoyed the opening scene of the film, which perfectly nails the tone and atmosphere for the rest of the movie, while also just being really entertaining on its own, with showing how cool the Flash's powers are, and also giving Ben Affleck's Batman a decent amount of screen time and action as his last appearance as the character. Another aspect that worked well here were the emotional moments revolving around Barry. You could feel for him, and especially in a pretty heart-wrenching moment at the end, and a pretty decent twist that tied into the start of the film. I liked that stuff a lot. Unfortunately, though there were a lot of solid moments in the film, and no actor did a bad job, there's just no better way to describe this movie besides being a mess. Ironically, even though the film was about a guy running super fast, I thought that the pacing from time to time was a little bit too fast for its own good. The first act of the film is paced pretty well for the most part, and I don't really have many complaints with it there. It's with the second and especially the third acts where there's issues. The second act kinda goes through some things a little too quickly, such as what they do with character moments with Batman and Supergirl. However, it isn't as bad as the third act, where it just devolves into nothing but mindless action with quite a few stupid decisions being made within it. Though characters like Michael Keaton's Batman and Supergirl were alright, I still couldn't grasp onto this version of Barry Allen, neither his present or past self. Present Barry still comes off as being irritating with how he acts. I understand that he's supposed to be emotionally stunted, being quirky but lovable, but I just think there could have been a better way to write that without making him tiresome to listen to. I also get that the movie was trying to pull off this Barry seeing his past self being annoying and thus maturing as a person himself kind of thing, and while I think it paid off fairly well in the end with developing his character and tying the main message of the movie together, it just wasn't fun to watch. This had to do with how annoying I found past Barry to be. I found him to be nothing more than irritating, and I groaned almost any time he opened his mouth. The movie tried to make him seem annoying in a funny way with jokes that he spouted out, but none of them landed and just made me roll my eyes at him. And that goes for all of the comedy here. I didn't laugh at a single joke here, and found them all to be extremely easy jokes to make. But other people at my theater laughed at some of them, so I can't really say they were totally unfunny. Though on the bright side, the movie ends in a way that may leave the door open for someone else to take over from Ezra, and I would very much like for that to happen. The action itself throughout the movie ranges from being pretty cool to downright uninteresting. Again, the opening action sequence with the Flash and Batman was cool, since we got to see some neat stuff done with super speed while also seeing Batman in a decent chase scene. As cool as Michael Keaton Batman action scenes were, a couple of them were so dimly lit that I could barely tell what was going on. But what was really surprising was that as the movie progressed, there were pretty much no other cool ways they showed super speed being used besides like one or two moments. Super speed can be utilized in such cool ways, Like, the possibilities are pretty much endless, but the film decided to pretty much just have Flash punch people extremely fast, and that was just really disappointing to see. While I did find some instances, such as Barry going back in time, to be quite visually interesting, unfortunately, the CGI for the most part kinda took me out of the film because it is pretty bad. Like, I'm not joking when I say that whenever there are shots focusing on people's faces that are 100% CGI, it looks atrocious. Especially towards the end in a really just gross and tasteless reference-filled nightmare sequence where any person that's CGI looks, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this, as bad as the Scorpion King. But luckily, that moment doesn't last for too long and is fairly quick. It's just strange though, since most of the visual effects that aren't people look fairly decent. It's just the people who look like melting pieces of plastic. But with all that being taken into consideration, The Flash is kind of the perfect way to send off the DCEU, by being a total mess. But to say that the film is 100% terrible or better than The Dark Knight is disingenuous. I think at the end of the day, The Flash is dumb fun, with decent characters, okay action, a good story, and serviceable comedy. It may not be a film I'll rewatch over and over again, but it is one I can certainly say is better than a majority of other comic book movie releases, especially Marvel's recent output. Except that one. And that one too. I guess some of the negativity I harbor against the film is just the fact that it isn't a true Flash movie. None of his villains make appearances, we don't see any side characters associated with him, and the filmmakers just don't utilize the almost limitless possibilities the character has in the film. But even beyond it not being the Flash movie I would have wanted, I just don't think it's an incredibly strong film either. Honestly, if you want a good Flash movie that also adapted the Flashpoint story more faithfully, I'd recommend checking out the 2013 animated Flashpoint Paradox film. It's actually really good and available on Max. But with nothing else to say or add, I give The Flash a 6 out of 10.